They handed me a prenup with smiles that said I wasn't good enough, so I signed it. 3 years later, that signature became the very weapon that protected my $38 million inheritance from them. Standing in the Museum of Modern Art, surrounded by 43 paintings worth more than most people see in a lifetime, I watched my ex-fiancé's face turn white as understanding finally hit him. "The prenup," his father said, his voice barely above a whisper. I met Victor Ashford's eyes without flinching. "Protects all of your assets from me, and all of mine from you. Your lawyer was very thorough." Dominic stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Alessa, you did all of this without us. After everything, I interrupted, my voice steady and clear. "I realized I didn't need saving. I never did. I just needed to stop letting you convince me I was less than I am." His mother, Margot, forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Very impressive, Alessandra. Though I do hope you haven't burned any bridges. The art world has a long memory." I smiled back. "So do I, Margot. So do I. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got here. How the document meant to keep me in my place became my greatest weapon. How 3 years of being told I wasn't enough ended with me walking away with everything that mattered. If you've ever felt underestimated or undervalued, if you've ever made yourself smaller just to fit into someone else's world, you need to hear this story. And if you want more stories about people who refuse to stay small, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Mr. David Love Stories. Trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. My name is Alessandra Moretti, and this is the story of how a prenup designed to protect a billionaire family's fortune ended up protecting mine. It started with a dinner invitation. The restaurant was one of those places where silence costs extra, where the chandeliers whispered secrets and the waitstaff moved like shadows. Margot Ashford had chosen it, of course. She chose everything when it came to her son. I should have known something was wrong the moment we sat down. Dominic's hand was clammy when he took mine. His father, Victor, wouldn't meet my eyes. And Margot, well, Margot had that smile. The one that looked warm from a distance, but turned cold the closer you got. "Alessandra, darling," Margot began, her voice dripping with honey-coated arsenic. "You do understand this is merely protocol. Nothing personal, of course." She slid a leather portfolio across the white tablecloth. The sound it made, that soft whisper of expensive leather on expensive linen, is something I still hear sometimes in my quieter moments. I opened it. 37 pages stared back at me. Legal terminology that all boiled down to one simple message. You're not one of us, and you never will be. "A prenup?" I asked quietly, looking up at Dominic, waiting for him to say something, anything. He just stared at his plate. Victor cleared his throat. The sound was sharp as a gavel. "The Ashford collection has been in our family for 4 generations, Miss Moretti. The galleries, the properties, the acquisitions, these are legacies that must be protected." He still wasn't looking at me. He'd barely looked at me since we sat down. "This is standard procedure," Margot continued, reaching for her wine glass. Her diamond bracelet caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across the table. "Surely someone in your profession understands the importance of preservation." "My profession?" She said it like I cleaned toilets for a living. I was an art conservator. I had a master's degree from Columbia. I'd restored works for the Morgan Library, the Frick private collections across 3 continents. I'd spent 5 years learning the chemistry of canvas and pigment, the archaeology of brushstrokes, the delicate surgery of bringing dead beauty back to life. But to Margot Ashford, I was just a technician, someone who worked with her hands, someone from Queens whose father drove a taxi and whose mother taught elementary school, someone who wasn't good enough for her son. "I understand preservation very well, Mrs. Ashford," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I do it for a living." "Then you understand why this is necessary." It wasn't a question. "If things don't work out between you and Dominic, this simply ensures that you'll leave with whatever you came in with. Clean, simple, fair." Fair, the word tasted like ash. I'd never once asked them for money, never once hinted that I wanted a piece of their wealth. Yet here they were, treating me like some gold digger trying to trap their son. "Dominic." I turned to him, giving him one last chance to defend me, to stand up to his parents, to prove that what we had was worth fighting for. He finally looked up from his plate. "Alessa, It's just a formality. It doesn't change anything between us. Something in my chest cracked. Not broke. Not yet. But cracked. Nothing between us will change, he continued, reaching for my hand. I love you. This is just, protecting what's been in the family. You understand, right? I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. Of course I understand, I heard myself say. Margot's smile widened. Victorious, I knew you were a sensible girl. They handed me a pen, some expensive thing that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The weight of it in my hand felt like judgment. I signed. Margot and Victor looked so pleased with themselves. Dominic squeezed my hand, relief evident in his exhale, like he'd just dodged a bullet, like I was the problem that had been solved. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself love was bigger than money. I told myself I'd never wanted their wealth anyway. So what did it matter if a piece of paper said I couldn't have it? I told myself a lot of things that turned out to be lies. The first year was good, actually good, not just pretend good. Dominic worked at his family's flagship gallery in Chelsea, handling acquisitions that could fund small nations. I continued my conservation work at the museum, spending my days in the temperature-controlled vault, coaxing life back into paintings that had survived wars and floods and the simple entropy of time. We lived in his apartment, a penthouse in Tribeca that his parents had purchased for him when he turned 25. An investment property, they called it. Though Dominic had never paid $1 of mortgage, the walls were adorned with works from the family collection, a small Diebenkorn sketch, a Frankenthaler print, a ceramic piece that might have been a genuine Picasso, but probably wasn't. I tried to make it ours, brought in plants, reorganized the kitchen to actually be functional instead of just beautiful. Hung a few pieces I'd collected over the years, lithographs from artist friends, a watercolor from a street vendor in Prague, things that mattered to me. Margot visited once, unannounced of course. She walked through the apartment with her lips pressed together, examining my changes like a health inspector finding violations. How eclectic, she finally said, looking at my watercolor. The word landed like a slap. A week later, at dinner with Dominic's parents, Victor mentioned that the Tribeca apartment was technically still part of the family portfolio, and perhaps significant changes should be discussed first. We wouldn't want to devalue the property, he added, cutting into his steak. I took my paintings down the next day. That should have been my first clue. When you can't hang your own paintings on the wall, you're not building a home. You're living in someone else's museum. The second year, things started shifting. Small things at first, easy to explain away, easy to ignore. Dominic began working later. Gallery events, he said. Donor meetings. His parents needed him to represent the family at auctions in London, at fairs in Basel, at private viewings in Hong Kong. I was invited to some of these. The ones where having a fiancé was advantageous. The ones where being seen as settled and serious helped close deals. But not all of them. At the events I did attend, Margot would introduce me with a smile that never reached her eyes. This is Alessandra, she'd say to collectors and curators. She works at the museum. Never what I did, never my actual title. Never that I was a senior conservator who'd been published in the Journal of the American Institute for Conservation, just a vague association with an institution that gave me just enough legitimacy to be tolerated. And then the comments started. Little corrections, small suggestions. Maybe don't discuss your restoration work at dinner, Alessa, Dominic said one evening after a gallery event. People find it a bit technical, a bit boring. Do you really need to wear your glasses? He asked another time. You look so much softer without them. Mother mentioned there's an excellent colorist in the village. I could make you an appointment, just to brighten things up a bit. Each comment was minor. Individually, they were nothing. Just helpful suggestions from someone who loved me and wanted me to be my best self, right? Collectively, they were erosion, water on stone, wearing me down so gradually I didn't notice I was disappearing. By the third year, I barely recognized myself. I'd stopped talking about my work unless asked directly, and even then, I downplayed it, made it sound simpler than it was, less important, less technical, less me. I'd learned which opinions were acceptable to express and which ones would earn me tight smiles and subject changes. Politics was fine, as long as I agreed with Victor. Art was fine as long as I deferred to Dominic. Food, fashion, safe celebrity gossip, those were my lanes. I wore the clothes Margot complimented and abandoned the ones that earned silence. I became quieter, smaller, a supporting character in someone else's story. And Dominic, he became more like them with each passing month. Or maybe he'd always been like them, and I'd just been too in love to see it. The apartment was still technically theirs. The car Dominic drove was registered to the family business. Even the engagement ring on my finger, a stunning emerald-cut diamond that Margot had insisted upon, had been in the Ashford family for 2 generations. Nothing was ours. Everything was borrowed, conditional, subject to approval. "You're so fortunate," Margot would say, usually after a few glasses of wine. "Dominic has given you access to a world most people only dream of." Access, as if I were a guest with a temporary pass, as if at any moment security might escort me out. I should have left then, should have recognized that I was being slowly erased. But I'd invested 3 years. We'd set a wedding date. I kept thinking, once we're married, things will be different. Once I'm officially family, they'll finally accept me. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday. I was in the lab, working on a damaged sergeant, a portrait of a young woman whose face had been partially obscured by water damage. There was something meditative about the work, the careful application of solution, the patient waiting, the gradual revelation of what had been hidden. My phone buzzed against the stainless steel table. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Is this Alessandra Moretti?" The voice was professional, male, slightly hurried, speaking. "My name is James Chen. I'm an attorney with Morrison and Fisk. I represent the estate of Vivienne Rousseau. I'm calling because you're named as a beneficiary in her will." I nearly dropped my brush. Vivienne Rousseau. I hadn't heard that name in almost a decade. She'd been my mentor during my graduate program. A brilliant, difficult woman who'd fled Paris in the 1960s and built a legendary career authenticating and restoring French Impressionist works. She was exacting, impatient, terrifyingly intelligent. She'd taken me on as her assistant for 1 summer, worked me to exhaustion, criticized everything I did, made me redo tasks until my hands cramped and my eyes blurred. And then, at the end of that brutal summer, she'd looked at my final restoration and said, "You have adequate potential." Coming from Vivienne, it was high praise. We'd stayed in touch sporadically after that. Cards at Christmas, occasional emails about technique or attribution questions. I'd heard she'd retired to a small estate in the Hudson Valley, but we hadn't spoken in years. "I didn't know she'd passed," I said quietly, setting down my brush. 3 weeks ago, very peaceful. She left specific instructions. James Chen paused. "Miss Moretti, would you be able to come to our office? There are some materials that need to be transferred to you directly." Materials. I assumed he meant perhaps some of her tools, maybe a few books. Vivienne had always been generous with her knowledge, if not her praise. I went to the law office the next day. What James Chen handed me was not a box of tools. It was documentation for a climate-controlled storage facility in Red Hook. He slid the folder across his desk the same way Margot had slid the prenup across that restaurant table 3 years earlier. But the weight of these pages was different. "Inside that facility are 43 paintings," James said, watching my face. "I think you should review the inventory before we discuss further." My hands shook as I opened the folder. Bertha Morisot, Mary Cassatt, Suzanne Valadon, Marie Bracamon, Cecilia Beau, female impressionists and post-impressionists who'd been overshadowed by their male contemporaries, overlooked by history, undervalued by the market. Until recently, Vivienne spent 60 years quietly acquiring these, James explained. She was very specific about their purpose. They're to be exhibited, not sold. However, the insurance valuations and potential authentication services you could provide, combined with exhibition fees and eventual philanthropic donations. He paused. "Miss Moretti, you're looking at a collection worth approximately $38 million. The room tilted. The air got thick. I couldn't breathe properly. "She left a letter for you as well." He handed me an envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, my name in Vivienne's sharp, precise handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. "Alessandra, if you're reading this, I'm dead. which means I can finally say things without worrying about sentiment making me soft. You have a gift, not just for restoration. Many people can learn the chemistry and technique. You have an eye. You see what others miss. You understand that every painting is a conversation across time, and your job is to listen. I've watched your career from a distance. You're good at what you do, but you're playing small, working in institutions, taking orders from curators who wouldn't know a genuine brushstroke from a reproduction. These paintings are yours now, not to own. Art doesn't belong to anyone, not really, but to steward, to bring into the light, to ensure these women's voices aren't forgotten. Also, I suspect you'll need the financial independence. That boy you're engaged to, I looked him up. Old money, art dealer family, the kind of people who see paintings as investments rather than revolutions. Don't let them make you small, Alessandra. You were never meant to be small. VR. I sat in that lawyer's office and cried, not delicate tears, the ugly kind, the kind that come from somewhere deep and true. In that moment, sitting in a stranger's office, holding a letter from a dead woman, I felt more seen than I had in 3 years with the man I was supposed to marry. I didn't tell Dominic immediately. I needed time to process, to understand what this meant, to sit with the weight of this responsibility. I visited the storage facility alone, walked through rows of carefully archived paintings, each one a masterpiece of light and color and defiant female genius, women who'd painted in a world that told them they shouldn't, who'd created beauty despite being dismissed and undervalued and erased. I stood in front of a Morisot, a woman at a window, light streaming across her face, her expression distant, contemplative, free. I understood her. I think maybe I'd always understood her, that longing for something beyond the cage you've been given. When I finally told Dominic 3 days later, his reaction was immediate and telling. 38 million? His eyes widened, not with sympathy for my loss, not with curiosity about Vivian or what she'd meant to me, just calculation. Alessa, that's incredible. We could. He stopped himself, recalibrated. You could do anything, he corrected. We could do anything. We, that word, hung in the air between us, like smoke. He pulled out his phone immediately, started making calls. Within an hour, he'd arranged a dinner with his parents to share the good news. This is huge, he said, pacing the apartment that was technically theirs, not ours. This changes everything. He hadn't asked me how I felt. Hadn't asked about Vivian, about what she'd meant to me, about the weight of this responsibility, about the fact that my mentor, the woman who'd seen potential in me when I barely saw it myself, was dead. He'd gone straight to the number, to the possibilities, to what it could mean for us. For him, something cold settled in my chest, something clear and bright and final. Pause for just a second. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever lost yourself trying to please someone else, drop a comment below telling me what you learned from that experience. Your story might help someone else watching this. And make sure you're subscribed to Mr. David Love Stories, because these aren't just stories. They're reminders that you're not alone. Dinner with the Ashfords was revelatory, like watching a magic trick once you know how it's done. Margot was warm, actually warm. She hugged me when we arrived. Hugged me. In 3 years, she'd never hugged me. Alessandra, this is extraordinary, she gushed, ushering us to the table. Vivian Rousseau. Of course we knew of her work. Victor, didn't we try to acquire some pieces through her back in the 90s? Victor nodded, looking at me with new interest, actually making eye contact for the first time in our entire relationship. She was notoriously difficult to work with, very particular. The fact that she left her collection to you speaks volumes, Alessandra. It really does. It was the first time he'd complimented me in 3 years. We should discuss strategy, Margot continued, already pulling out her phone. The Ashford Gallery would be the perfect venue for the initial exhibition. We have the reputation, the client base, the expertise to position this properly. We could do a whole series, launch you as a curator, not just a conservator. This could be transformative for everyone involved. She said we 14 times during dinner. I counted. Dominic was energized in a way I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. He talked about partnership opportunities, about combining the Rousseau collection with the Ashford resources, about building something bigger than either family had accomplished alone. "It just makes sense," he said, reaching for my hand across the table, "to keep something this valuable in the family, to build this together. I mean, once we're married, it really is a family asset, right? A legacy we're building together. In the family. Together. Family asset." The words felt like fingers tightening around my throat. "Actually," I said carefully, "the collection comes with specific instructions from Vivian about how it's to be exhibited, who has control over it. She was very particular." Margot waved this away like an annoying fly. Of course, we'd honor her vision. "But Alessandra, darling, you're not a curator, you're a conservator. You'd need help with the business side, the marketing, the positioning. That's what we do. That's what the Ashford name brings to the table." "Mother's right," Dominic added. "You're brilliant at the technical work, babe, but this is a different game. This is my world, our world. Let us help you." I smiled, nodded, listened to them make plans for my inheritance like it was theirs to plan, and the next morning I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Okonkwo. She'd been highly recommended by a colleague at the museum who'd gone through a brutal divorce. "I need to understand my legal position," I told her, sliding the prenup across her desk. Patricia read it slowly, making notes, her expression neutral and professional. "This is thorough," she finally said. They were very concerned with protecting the Ashford assets, the properties, the business interests, the art collection. It's all explicitly excluded from any marital estate. If you divorce, you'd leave with only what you brought into the marriage. "And what about what I acquired during the engagement? Before the marriage?" Patricia looked up. Sharp interest flickered in her dark eyes. "What did you acquire?" I told her about the Rousseau collection, about the $38 million, about Vivian's specific instructions that I be the sole steward. Patricia sat back in her chair. A slow smile spread across her face. "Miss Moretti, this prenup was written to protect his assets from you. It says absolutely nothing about protecting him from yours. If you marry, any commingling of resources would be voluntary on your part. If you divorce..." She tapped the document with one perfectly manicured finger. "This ensures he has no claim whatsoever to your collection, your earnings from it, or any derivative value." So the same document that was meant to keep me from taking anything from him keeps him from taking anything from you. Yes. I felt something shift inside me, something that had been bent for 3 years, suddenly straightening, remembering its original shape. "I want to establish a trust," I said, "separate from any marital assets, and I want to understand exactly what I'm walking into if I go through with this marriage." Patricia leaned forward. "Or what you're walking away from if you don't." Over the next 6 weeks, I played along. I became the best actress you've ever seen. I let Dominic think we were planning our future together. I attended meetings with his parents, listened to their grand designs for our collection, smiled when Margot started treating me like a peer instead of a servant, nodded when Victor actually asked my opinion about art instead of talking over me. It was fascinating, really, how quickly I'd gone from unworthy to invaluable, how love I'd never quite received was suddenly abundant now that I had something they wanted. Dominic became attentive again, romantic even. He started coming home earlier, planning date nights, talking about the wedding with genuine enthusiasm. "I knew you were special from the beginning," he told me one night, pulling me close on the couch that was technically his parents'. "I always knew." But he hadn't, had he? For 3 years, he'd let me shrink, let his parents diminish me, let me become a footnote in his family's story. It was only now that I had value they recognized, that I'd become worth cherishing, and that's when I knew, with absolute certainty, I'd never been more than an accessory to him, a pleasant addition to his life, acceptable, as long as I didn't cost anything or demand too much. The moment I'd become inconvenient, required defense against his parents, needed him to choose me over their approval, he'd chosen comfort instead. But now I was an asset, and assets get protected. It wasn't love. It had never been love. So, while Dominic and his parents made their plans, I made mine. First, I established the Rousseau Trust, a separate legal entity that owned and managed the collection. I was the sole trustee. Dominic's name appeared nowhere on the documentation. Second, I hired my own team, not the Ashford Gallery, independent curators I'd known for years. conservators from my professional network who actually cared about the art, a museum director who'd been trying to lure me away from my current position for 2 years. Third, I started looking for my own space, not a rental, a purchase, a brownstone in Fort Greene that needed work but had good bones and light that poured through the upper windows like honey. I paid in cash. Closed in 3 weeks. Told no one. Fourth, I started moving my things, slowly, carefully, during the day while Dominic was at the gallery, only a box or 2 at a time. Everything that was actually mine, my books, my clothes, my few pieces of art, my equipment, the things I'd brought into this relationship that had somehow become invisible, Dominic never noticed. He'd never paid attention to my things anyway. And then I waited. I waited for the moment I knew was coming, the moment when Dominic would show me exactly who he was. It happened on a Thursday. I came home early. The museum had closed for a private event. I walked into the apartment and found Dominic in the living room with a woman I didn't recognize. They weren't touching, weren't even sitting particularly close, but there was an intimacy to their conversation, a familiar ease that made my stomach drop. Alessa, Dominic stood quickly. Surprise flashed across his face before he smoothed it away. You're home early. This is Charlotte. Charlotte Whitmore. She's a buyer for a collector in Singapore. We've been discussing the Rousseau collection. Charlotte smiled, extended a manicured hand. Your collection is extraordinary, Miss Moretti. Dominic's been telling me about your vision for the exhibition. Has he? It wasn't a question. Something in my tone made Dominic flinch. Charlotte's firm is very interested in representing some of the pieces for their Asian market. It could be a huge opportunity. I know you want to exhibit them, but down the line, having those relationships established, I'm not selling. Not now, obviously, but eventually, strategically, if the right offer came along. I'm not selling, I repeated, looking directly at Charlotte. The collection isn't for sale. It was never for sale. That was the entire point. Charlotte's smile tightened, professional mask slipping just slightly. Of course, Dominic mentioned this was a personal project for you. Personal project, as if Vivienne's life work, these women's artistic legacies, my responsibility as a steward, as if it were all just a hobby, a phase I'd eventually grow out of. After Charlotte left, Dominic turned to me, frustration evident in every line of his body. You embarrassed me, he said. Charlotte is one of the most connected buyers in the industry. Do you know how hard I worked to get her interested? To get her to come here personally? I didn't ask you to do that. We're supposed to be partners, Alessa. This collection, it could set us up for life, but you keep blocking every opportunity. You're being unreasonable. It's not your collection, it's mine. The words hung between us. Clear, final, true. Dominic's expression shifted. Something cold entered his eyes, something I'd seen him use with difficult artists and demanding clients, but never with me, never directed at me. Is that really how you want to play this? His voice was quiet, dangerous. After everything my family has done for you, the connections, the opportunities, the lifestyle you've had access to, I never asked for any of that. You didn't have to ask. He laughed, bitter and sharp. You walked into this relationship with nothing. You're living in my apartment, wearing jewelry my family gave you, attending events you'd never have access to without the Ashford name, and now you inherit some paintings and suddenly you're too good for us? There it was, the truth he'd been polite enough to hide for 3 years. I'd always been the charity case, the girl from Queens who should be grateful for their attention, for the privilege of their world. I think, I said carefully, keeping my voice level, we need to talk about whether this wedding should actually happen. His laugh was harsh, ugly. Now you want out? After you've gotten everything you could from this relationship? After 3 years of my family investing in you? What exactly have I gotten, Dominic? I felt something break loose inside me. 3 years of biting my tongue. I've spent 3 years making myself smaller so your parents would tolerate me. I've bitten my tongue through 1,000 casual insults. I've lived in a house where I'm not allowed to hang my own art. I've listened to your mother explain what I should wear, how I should talk, what opinions I'm allowed to have. What have I gotten except the privilege of being disrespected in expensive restaurants? You got me. He said it like it should be enough, Like he was the prize I should be grateful to have won. Maybe once I would have thought it was. I need some time, I told him. I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while. Fine. He was already pulling out his phone, dismissing me. Take your time. Figure out whatever this is. But Alessa? He looked up. Don't forget who's actually building the life you're living. Don't forget who has the real power here. I left that night, took only what I needed. The rest was already at the brownstone anyway, and I didn't look back. You can probably see where this is going, right? But here's the thing. The twist is even better than you think. If you're invested in seeing how this plays out, smash that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and stay tuned because the next part, pure justice. The email from Margot came 2 days later. Subject line, wedding concerns. Alessandra, Dominic mentioned you're having some doubts. This is perfectly natural before a wedding. Cold feet, we call it. But let's be practical. You've built a life with our son. You're part of our world now. Walking away would be unfortunate. You'd lose access to the networks and opportunities the Ashford name provides. Moreover, I'd hate for there to be any professional complications. The art world is quite small, and reputations are fragile things. I'm sure once you've had time to reflect, you'll see that staying is in everyone's best interest. Warmly, Margot. It wasn't a letter. It was a threat. I forwarded it to Patricia. Her response was immediate. Do not respond. Document everything. And let's move forward with the plan. The exhibition opened 6 weeks later, not at the Ashford Gallery, at the Museum of Modern Art, in partnership with the National Museum of Women in the Arts, a comprehensive showcase of female impressionists. Anchored by the Rousseau collection, I'd worked 18-hour days for weeks, personally restoring several pieces, writing catalog essays, collaborating with scholars who actually cared about the art rather than its resale value. The opening was packed. Critics and collectors, students and academics, people who'd never set foot in a museum before, but had seen the publicity about this rediscovered treasury of women's art. I wore a dress I'd chosen myself, deep blue, simple, elegant. No one had approved it but me. I spoke about the work without apologizing or downplaying, without making myself smaller or simpler or less technical. I talked about Vivian, about these remarkable women who'd painted despite a world that told them they shouldn't. I felt like myself for the first time in years. Dominic showed up halfway through. I saw him across the gallery, standing with his parents, all three of them wearing matching expressions of barely concealed fury. He approached me near a stunning Morisot, a young woman at a window, light streaming across her face. The same painting I'd stood in front of at the storage facility. You did this without us, Dominic said quietly. I did this without you, I corrected. After everything, I realized I didn't need saving. I never did. I just needed to stop letting you convince me I was less than I am. Margot appeared at his shoulder, her smile sharp as glass. Very impressive, Alessandra, though I do hope you haven't burned any bridges. The art world has a long memory. So do I, Margot. So do I. Victor was the only one who seemed to understand. He looked at the paintings, at the crowds, at the critical acclaim already buzzing through the room. Something like respect flickered across his face. The prenup, he said abruptly. I met his eyes. Protects all of your assets from me, and all of mine from you. Your lawyer was very thorough. Understanding dawned on his face, then something that might have been admiration. Clever girl. I learned from the best, I said. Vivian taught me that restoration isn't about returning something to its original state. It's about preservation, protecting what matters from further damage. I looked at Dominic, really looked at him, saw him clearly for the first time in 3 years. I'm calling off the wedding. You'll have the ring back by Monday. I know it's a family piece. I've already moved my things out of the apartment. You'll never have to see me again. You're making a mistake, Margot hissed. No, I said. I'm correcting one. And just like that, 3 years evaporated. The mask came off completely. I wasn't his partner. I was his project, his good deed, his acceptable enough choice who should have been grateful for the opportunity. If this story gave you chills, if you're feeling that justice rush right now, I need you to do 3 things. Hit that like button, drop a comment, telling me what lesson you're taking from this. And subscribe to Mr. David Love Stories, because every week I bring you stories about people who refuse to settle for less than they deserved. Don't miss the next one. That was 8 months ago. The brownstone is mine now, fully renovated and truly mine, not technically mine, not borrowed, not subject to someone else's approval, mine. I have a conservation studio on the top floor with perfect north light, the kind of light I used to dream about when I was working in that basement vault at the museum. The Rousseau collection is touring nationally. Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, every city bringing these women's work to new audiences. Plans are already underway for an international exhibition next year. Paris, London, Berlin. I left my museum position and started my own practice. Authentication and conservation services for institutions and private collectors who value expertise over pedigree, who care about the work more than the name. I'm booked 18 months out. Last week, I got a call from a gallery in Paris. They're interested in discussing a permanent exhibition of female artists, a collaboration that would honor Vivienne's legacy. The meeting is next month. I'm flying over on my own dime, staying in a hotel I chose, answering to no one but myself. I haven't seen Dominic since the exhibition. I heard through professional circles that he and Charlotte Whitmore are dating now. I hope she knows what she's signing up for. I hope she values herself more than I did. Sometimes I drive past the Tribeca penthouse. I don't feel anger anymore, not even sadness, just a distant curiosity about the woman I was, the one who thought love meant making herself smaller, who believed acceptance was worth the cost of erasure. Vivienne's letter sits framed in my studio. I read it whenever I need reminding. Don't let them make you small, Alessandra. You were never meant to be small. She was right. She was right about everything. I wasn't meant to be small. I wasn't meant to be grateful for scraps of affection from people who only valued me when I became profitable. I wasn't meant to live in someone else's space, play by someone else's rules, apologize for taking up room. The prenup that was supposed to ensure I'd leave with nothing ended up being the thing that let me leave with everything that mattered. My work, on my own terms, my integrity, intact and uncompromised, my voice, loud and unapologetic, myself, whole and undiminished. And that, it turns out, is worth far more than $38 million, though having the $38 million doesn't hurt. Here's what I learned. What I want you to take away from this: know your worth before someone else tries to set your price. Documents meant to keep you down can become your freedom. Love that requires you to shrink isn't love. It's a cage. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming exactly who you were meant to be. The prenup wasn't the villain. It was the mirror. It showed me exactly how they saw me, and ultimately, it protected me from them. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And when they hand you a contract that says you're not good enough, sign it. Then prove them right by walking away with everything they tried to take from you: your dignity, your dreams, and your self-respect. I'm not small anymore. I'm not small at all.